Morning, everybody. I thought that was fantastic. And I think as a developer, we find it frustratingly hard to adopt technology into what we do. I think what we just saw there is a fantastic product which helps at the front end with the design. What I wanted to talk about today a little bit was the rest of the development cycle and the way that we're trying to embed tech into what we're doing. So I'm going to very quickly skip over the background to the problems that we have, and then we'll start talking about some of the early adoption that we are seeing. So my name is Barry Jessup. I'm a director and owner of a business called First Base. We are mixed-use developers in those cities predominantly, but also looking at other places, including Milton Keynes and Reading. But as a developer, for us, it's more than just about the buildings. I think the design tech around the buildings is really important, but for us, we are creating very long-term places, and therefore we have requirements really to embed tech along the whole life cycle of those developments. And it should really be a changer for real estate, because at the moment we know that the sector is a desperately slow adopter, and we are still running frankly archaic approaches to nearly everything that we do, whether it's design, whether it's planning, whether it's construction. It's very old-fashioned and it's very, very inefficient. And in a world where we really need to be developing better and quicker, it simply isn't working. We also have a ridiculously complex legal structure and a very old-fashioned approach to the way that we deal with customers. So we need to change all of these aspects, and we need to do it really quickly. So from our perspective, what does that mean, and where are we adopting technology, and where would we like to see more opportunities to do so? We think it's across the board. We're seeing it in a big picture way elsewhere, and I'll come back to this later. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Sidewalk Labs approach in Toronto. I think there are some aspects here that we are trying to borrow. And I was really comforted by the presentation before me, because at the moment we're spending a lot of time in the US looking for tech ideas and real estate solutions, because we're not seeing them in the UK. That doesn't mean they're not in the UK, it just means they're not being connected with us. And I think we're finding that really frustrating. So we're over in the US, we're particularly on the West Coast, New York and Toronto and Boston, trying to adopt some aspects that can improve the type of developments that we're creating. On the flip side, we're spending a lot of time in Asia as well, looking at construction materials, because again, we have a very old-fashioned approach to building. We want to move away from steel and concrete. We have declared as a business against climate emergency, and we are now starting to try to plot a path into a much more dynamic future. The use of bamboo is a really good example of how we can do that. It grows 10 times more quickly than timber, has a lot of structural strength that we can use. But we're frustrated by the pace of change and the regulatory changes as well that are required to allow us to use a number of these technologies. So we're focused, what are we focused on? Delivering at speed. So what can we adopt that can allow us to deliver more quickly? We want our places to work more efficiently and be more interesting. So how can we embed technology into the communities that we're creating to improve the everyday lives of these individuals? We've talked about the environment, but it's number one on the agenda, certainly for me, and certainly for a lot of our investors, which is a refreshing change perhaps from a few years ago. And there's some practical elements there. One aspect which I do want to dwell on a little bit is, and it's that last point around community, is as a developer often we're seen as being very insular. We're creating everything within our schemes for the people in our schemes, and that shouldn't be the case. And so I've got a couple of examples here of some tech that we've adopted. I think we've been early adopters on this, that is allowing us to reach outside of the actual development, the red line of the development. One of those examples is this. It's a product which we've developed with a company called Built ID, and it's called Give My View, and it's not rocket science. but nobody else is using it yet, which is about allowing us to create effectively a gamified process for having proper engagement with the community during the planning process. So what this means is that the person who, at the moment, the planning process only really talks to the very vocal minority, who are typically naysayers and anybody that's got sort of time on a Tuesday afternoon to pop to the local community centre. You've got the profile. So what we're trying to do is to reach out to the silent majority. So one of the ways we do that, we create an app, we go onto social media, we can geofence this very effectively, and we actually engage in a gamified way with those individuals to better understand what they want. It works for us because we get genuine feedback, so we can be more authentic in the developments that we're creating. It works for the local authority because it helps them on their statutory process, and it helps the politicians who have a lot of control over this country, sadly. Helps the politicians to justify the decisions they're making. So that's really useful. And then linked with that is, as well as during the planning process, what do we leave at the end? And we're working with a company called District on what we describe as a community interaction app. So these guys developed this initially as effectively a way for businesses to coordinate in office parks and to share meeting rooms and to provide services to each other. We took that idea and we've expanded it to encompass all of the uses in our development. So not only offices, but also F&B and residential. And then we've gone one step further and said, well, why should we restrict that to the actual location, the actual development itself? We're now starting to engage with all of the areas around us. So this can be this effectively is just an opportunity for businesses and for individuals to interact and to sell services into each other. So suddenly you have a real reason for the local community to support what you're doing and a real value that you're giving back to them. Again, the legal process that we have and the structural process around the title is really inefficient. So we are actively exploring blockchain as a way of tracking transactions. It's a little bit prosaic in terms of exciting stuff that we're doing, but can actually save a lot of time and money and can accelerate delivery. And I was up at Revo yesterday with Homes England, and the ambitions for delivering more homes and better communities is very, very high, but at the moment we're really not seeing any progress and haven't seen any progress in 30 years. It's actually some quite prosaic aspects of development like this that can shave time off delivery. But we're going further. I mentioned previously we spend a lot of time in the US and in particular MIT, and I know there are differing views possibly in this room about the role that autonomous vehicles will have. We are firmly in the camp that they're coming very quickly, and they will fundamentally change the way that the urban realm works. So we are working in one of the cities that we're developing with a very high-profile autonomous vehicle software company to create the first autonomous vehicle-enabled development. I.e., there are certain aspects we can build in to the project that will allow it to work more efficiently. That's both from a car pickup drop-off perspective, but also from a delivery perspective. So when you've got electric autonomous vehicles that are silent, effectively, you can deliver at 3 o'clock in the morning. It fundamentally changes the way that you develop your schemes, and you can therefore make them, I think, much more attractive to humans, which is what we should be trying to do. That's an example at Brooklyn Naval Yard, where they've adopted autonomous vehicles to take you to and from the scheme. We also spent some time in Seattle with Amazon. I'm sure everybody in their day-to-day life, certainly in the office and at home, struggles with the delivery of packages. There's an environmental aspect to that as well, but we won't cover that today. But certainly the arrival of, I think, aerial drones is here. I know Skyports are doing some great work at the moment in terms of just a very simple technological solution for that. In a number of the cities that we're talking to, this is now forming part of our planning application. So we're not quite there yet. I know the regulation hasn't caught up, but it will. So we're starting to design that into our schemes to ensure that we're ready for the next step. But perhaps the most important thing that we're doing is providing people with the opportunity to fail. And I think somebody said in the first presentation that real estate developers and real estate generally doesn't like to admit to failure. We're quite happy to admit to failure. If you're not failing, you're not trying. And so what we're doing in a number of our schemes is trying to work particularly with local universities and colleges to allow them to trial new ideas. Because one thing we know is the creativity and the innovation that will impact real estate will not come from within the real estate sector. We've been waiting for decades for that to happen. It's not going to happen. So it's going to come from the outside in. And so what we need to do, what we have an obligation to do, in my opinion, as a developer, is to provide people with an opportunity to fail, and hopefully fail fast, and hopefully on occasion succeed. But we will provide within our developments the opportunity to do that. We'll create living labs, as we describe them, to allow people to test technology to see if it can have a beneficial impact. And this is my final slide. I think the key thing for us, and I'll stress it again, is we know that the innovation will not come from within the real estate sector. I think there's some great architects doing some great work, but I think a lot of the changes are going to come from outside of our day-to-day work, and we're really looking to embrace those and adopt those as soon as possible. Thank you.